Please welcome Nick Wolfe.
Hello, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So, as you may have guessed, I am Nick Wolfe. Let's start presenting. So, I am a junior software engineer at CultureAmp, and there is one thing that I love above all else. Can anyone in the audience guess what it is?
Feedback.
It is feedback. I love feedback so much that I include a link to a feedback form in my email signature, encouraging people to provide me feedback whenever they so desire, which has been mostly positive. I am such a feedback enthusiast that it is actually my preferred after sex pillow talk topic of discussion. Now, I will point out that one thing we learned from the startup community is that iterating on what works leads to powerful results. Now, really, I will point out for those of you, it's better done in a verbal format rather than via Google Doc. But then you can't do any sort of machine learning algorithms, so what are you going to do? Now, importantly, Ruby Australia, where do we see this going? I mean, it all started a year ago. We're coming up to our first year anniversary since it all began, full of nerves, but we progressed. We pried things open and we started to make things work. Then we got a little bit on the wild side. I bought that officers, cops hats and the handcuffs. But really, Ruby Australia, isn't it time we committed to each other? Or at
I said yes.
Or
How could you turn it down?
at the very least, isn't it time we commit together? So join me as we, you and I, Ruby Australia, go on a wonderful adventure to commit something as we talk about Git and my all-time #1 favorite gem in this talk, committing to overcommit. Now, unlike my previous 2 presentations, which were about Pry and Rubocop, which are fairly commonly known within the Ruby community, there's a good chance that many of you won't have heard of overcommit before. So I'll talk through what it does and discuss why it's my favorite. So, what is overcommit? Overcommit is a Git hook manager. Well, we make a little bit of progress, but then while most of you probably recognize the word Git, the term Git hook is a bit less familiar. So, what is a Git hook? A Git hook is a custom script or piece of code that will run whenever you run a particular Git command. So some examples of this are a pre-commit, which will run just before it runs your commit, a post-commit, which will run just after. You can also do things such as a pre-push, which will run just before you push up your code. And it also includes more complicated Git hooks, such as if you want to hook into rebasing your code as well. Now, it's all fun and games until we start live demo time. So, we will jump over to this handily prepared and hopefully large enough to see terminal window, where I have a bunch of random files that I am ready to commit. And of course, I'm a developer, so I make no mistakes, so surely this will go smoothly in a single attempt. So let's do git add -p, and we'll see some white space, that's probably fine. Oh, I've got some JavaScript there, that's probably fine. Something about echoing, it's okay. I've got some Ruby stuff. I've got an RSpec test, and it looks like I've got something, a to-do file. Yeah, it's probably all fine. Okay, so now let's write a good commit message. So let's do commit, let's spell it right, -m. Well, I mean, this looks good enough. Let's run that as our commit message. So, overcommit at this point starts to freak out a little. It will run each of the Git hooks that I have installed inside this repo. So let's run through these one by one. So the first thing it does is it checks, is there any trailing white space inside any of my folders? And it tells me I failed at this particular Git hook. It seems to be contained within a file called blank. So let's edit that file. We'll jump over, and for those who can't see, well, it's nothing but white space actually. So I probably don't need that. Let's just delete that line, and that will probably work out just fine. But I've still got a bunch of other fails in here. So the next one is my dear friend, Rubocop, telling me that I have failed at my Rubocop comparison. That appears to be happening in this file called Ruby. So let's edit that one as well. It's complaining that I'm comparing something to itself, in this case, true equals true, which is always going to be true. So we might as well remove that line and just keep the important and very relevant code of puts 4. But we're still not done here, because overcommit will also allow you to check for token strings. Now, these are customizable by you, but one of the ones that is quite common in the developer community is to use to-do. And it's telling me that when I was writing this code, and definitely not making any mistakes, I had written a to-do, which I still haven't fixed up. Let's remove this. And the to-do was, get rid of this comment. All right, well, that one's relatively easy to fix as well. So let's fix that one. We're almost there. Now, the next one is it's running ESLint over my JavaScript files. So in this case, we've detected a fail, which is an extra semicolon in this aptly named JavaScript file. So let's open that up. Let's remove that extra semicolon. And then we get to the last one, which is overcommit can, if you wanted to, actually run your entire RSpec suite. If you have a relatively small code base, this could make sense. If you have a larger code base, or if you have a lot of tests, which hopefully you do, otherwise I'm less enthusiastic on providing any support on getting it all working, then you may not want this particular Git hook, but it does exist. So let's go into that RSpec file and see what errors I've made. I'm expecting true to be false. All right, well, this seems like an easy fix as well. So now, without me having to push all this code up to the whatever continuous integration platform I may be using, the one that I personally use at work is BuildKite. Do we have anyone from BuildKite in the audience? No, no one at all. Well, they actually stole 2 of my favorite co-workers recently, so that's probably for the best. But To be fair, I mean, Culture Amp is stolen from pretty much everywhere anyway, so it all works out even. Now, we have hopefully fixed up all these issues. So let's once again git add -p, just so I can have a look at the various codes that I'm running. That one looks good. Oh, I remember that change. That looks good. All looks good. Oh, and I got rid of that to do. That's good. So let's try again. Yeah, this seemed fine the first time. Let's run it again. And at this stage, we are making progress. We have passed the pre-commit. Oh no. We appear to have gotten stuck at the running commit message hooks. So while overcommit can check various parts of your code before it runs the commit, just as it's about to action it, it will check to make sure that the commit message that you're using actually makes some sense, which for some reason, it doesn't seem to like my commit message of ... new line ... new line ... It complains about it for a number of reasons. So one, commit messages, depending on which standards you're using, they traditionally don't like you to have a full stop at the end of it because it should be read as a singular sentence. It will check the text width. There's an encouragement to have your commit messages be 60 characters or less. This makes it easier when you're reviewing the code that someone else has written, or even the code that you've written yourself more than 24 hours ago, to figure out what on earth it's doing in a very quick manner. It's checking that I capitalized to make sure that the sentence actually makes sense. And it's checking that the subject is just one line followed by a blank line. So these all seem relatively easy to fix. So let's do another commit message, git commit. Let's try commit changes to favorite gem. Now, just before I run this, one of the things to keep in mind is there's also some post-commit hooks. So I will just turn this around, and when I run this commit, and hopefully it works, because otherwise we'll have to go through this again, it will trigger my post-commit of lol commits. Now, lol commits, for those of you who are unfamiliar, because I know some people in the audience are, what do we want to do? We want to cd into local, cd into local share lol commits favorite. Each time I run a commit, and it works, which only happens a few times a day, as you may be able to guess from this, it will generate a new image and capture that image along with the commit. So we can see the commit that just worked then is this one here, and hopefully we will get to see a nice picture of, I guess you get a tiny bit of my hair here, so you know I was present. That's something. But this is yet another example of a post-commit hook that you can run.
Show us the one
Maybe later. Now,
you have to fill out that sexy feedback form first.
all of this is controlled by a file that is installed inside my repo, which is the overcommit YAML config file. So it runs a bunch of things that we've seen. So, for instance, it checks that I don't have any hard tabs or capitalized subjects. These are all the commit message ones. Then I have a list of pre-commit hooks. Many of those will be familiar now. You can use it with a bunch of others as well. I thought about including a demo of the Hamel Lint gem, but then I realized I'd have to write some Hamel, so I decided not to. We have post commits, which is where this lol commit came into being. So while a bunch of these are pre-filled, lol commits isn't by default considered one of the appropriate serious commit hooks. So I actually had to custom code this, but it turns out that it is relatively easy to define your own. And along similar lines, for those of you who use BuildKite, one of my favorite tools is called CC menu. And this will actually track how your various builds are going on BuildKite, just so that you can see if it passes the full test suite or it fails the full test suite. In my experience, hopefully, if I make it all this way, I've at least managed to weed out many of the bugs that have stopped me in the past. But one of the other custom hooks that I've built is called CC menu, because in order to get this working, you have to manually create the URL and add it in. BuildKite thankfully has a very easy to access API, but CC menu itself, I have yet to get particularly familiar with how to make it work. But I am of the opinion that anything that you have to do tediously twice, you should try and never have to do again, which is why I have built this other custom hook, which is every time I push it up to BuildKite, it will run this, meaning that it will track my build, and then as soon as I have a result, either a success or a failure, I'll get notified immediately so that I'm not stuck waiting thinking, oh wait, I ran a build earlier this morning and now I'm suddenly eating pizza. Whatever happened to that? So that is yet another example of the custom hooks that you can build as well. One last one, which definitely isn't drawing from a previous example at a previous employer where I accidentally pushed my untested code up to master branch, is you can also protect the branches that you can push to. This one, thankfully, has prevented me from pushing any untested code up to master or production. But whatever particular branches you're using are also customizable. Now, we'll jump back in. So we have covered running Rubocop. We've covered fix-me's or to-dos. We've covered trailing white space, committing length and commit length and format. One of the things that I didn't cover but is another nice feature is that node modules.bin.eslint isn't the default eslint, but you can customize the commands that you run for any particular Git hook. So in this case, rather than using the pre-installed eslint, it uses this specific one, which is customized to work with the code that I am using at work. This was actually a bit of a sticking point for me, but thankfully a bunch of the front-end devs at CultureAmp helped me figure this out, including Rob Howard. Rob Howard actually has a talk coming up at RubyConf, which I suggest, at RubyConf 2020, which tickets are still on sale at the standard price for the next 2 days. I suggest that you check it out. Now, lol commits I was introduced to by my housemate, but was actually made popular by Michael and Selena at a previous Rails camp. There's a Rails camp coming up in April. And in fact, Michael and Selena have a talk coming up at RubyConf, which is coming up soon, and you should definitely buy tickets. And finally, CC menu, the code to get this working and interacting with all of the nonsense Apple database stuff, was designed by my former co-worker, and I stole it from Dana Scherson, who is in fact presenting at RubyConf in just 1 month's time, and tickets are still available at the discounted price before you get to the late bird. Protected branches, I don't actually have anyone who helped me with this that is presenting at RubyConf, but I am very grateful to Blaze, my former co-worker, who did help me revert that commit before anything went terribly, terribly wrong. Now, some common questions what if I can't convince my team to use this? The solution that I've actually used before even having to ask that question is I've just included the overcommit YAML file in my global git ignore, which means that for me, it all runs automatically without having to have any discussions about deploying it or not. Doesn't this slow down your committing? Yes, it does, but it speeds up my builds. There's been a number of times when I've pushed up code only to realize several minutes or even 20 minutes later that I failed at some final step, and now to get this up and functioning, I have to go through that lengthy process again. An example recently was with Lint, whereas the process for pushing it up, I had to wait about 10 minutes, whereas running it locally took me just a few seconds. And finally, can I skip particular hooks or all hooks if it's a particularly important commit? Yes, you can. You can run skip equals Rubocop if you don't particularly like Rubocop, which, as I learned after presenting about Rubocop, many people don't. Or you can run overcommit underscore disable equals 1, which will cancel it for that particular commit or git command. Now, if you have any feedback that you would like to give me about this presentation or just in life, you are welcome to, and I am always open to it. I am Nick Wolf. You can find my feedback form at nickwolf.com.au/feedback and at these various social or coding medias. And with that, I'll open it to questions.
Great talk, Nick. Thanks
Thank
a
you.
lot. I have a quick question. I often use NoVerify because I'm a naughty boy. Does this work with NoVerify?
So I haven't had any experience with NoVerify, but is it something similar?
No, I mean, it's a Git sort of tag you can chuck on the end of your Git commit to NoVerify to force it to not run hooks.
Yes, I think I have used this in the past. I believe it does also function, but I wouldn't be 100% confident. I'd probably have to double check.
Right, thanks.
Thanks, Nick. When you're running the Rubocop, the ESLinter, and particularly the specs, is there a way to detect to run the specs only of the files that you are about to commit, the ones that are staged?
So Rubocop and ESLint by default only affect the specific files that have been modified, so the staged files. At the moment, the RSpec runs all specs, but I actually looked into it today and it seems as though it would be a relatively minor update because the functionality of just targeting modified files is already there. So it may be a commit that I actually try and commit to overcommit at some point. Another fellow coworker, Tim.
Hi, thanks for your talk. Just on that note, I haven't tried it, but there's a gem called Crystal Ball, which uses some regression algorithm to select the minimum number of tests to verify your suite is true based on the stage files. So that may be useful for powering up that workflow.
Absolutely. And third culture ramper in a row. DC, what can I do for you?
Hi, Nick. Great talk. Thank you. I'll write you some feedback later. So I've hand-rolled a bunch of these scripts on my own computer, and they're probably far worse than this. But one of the problems that I had that was if I forget to add the changes, like after I commit and I see all the errors, I go and I fix them, but I forget to add them, then my scripts would just be like, yeah, it looks fine. But I wouldn't have added the fixes to the commit. Does that make sense?
I think so. So this is, your scripts are testing the files rather than the staged changes?
Correct.
Yes. So in this instance, overcommit checks the actual staged state rather than the files in general.
Perfect.
So
Thank you.
it solves that issue. Fourth culture ramper in a row. Lauren, see, you're surrounded.
Thank you. So, do you keep an iPad like next to the bed, or?
So, in the event that you are looking to do this, my suggestion is you can actually set up a Google Assistant command, and then whatever you want that
You
command
don't
to
have
be.
to answer that, Nick. You can answer that like quietly later. Just apparently, Lauren has a real question, so I'm going to let her ask that now.
Okay.
Shit, now I have to remember what my real question was. The thing that stops you from pushing to certain branches.
Protected branches. Yes.
Protected branches. Is there I'm curious if there's like a commit version of that, like a pre-commit version?
Oh, yes,
Because I
there
would
is.
love something to stop me from like just accidentally, making a commit on master, like something that just says like make a branch.
There absolutely is. In the commit config that I use at work, I've set it on the pre-commit rather than the pre-push, but I wanted something to demonstrate the pre-push functionality. But yes, you can do it for pre-commit as well as for pre-push hooks.
Cool, thank you.
Culture Amp for number 5, Dan.
Hi Nick, Dan from Culture Amp here. How are you?
No, nice to meet you.
Is there a way to include another configuration file within another? So say if I wanted my repo to have a base configuration that would stop us committing to master, but then wanted to include my own personal rules that I didn't want to put into the repo. Is that something we could do?
Not that I can immediately think of. Probably the first solution would be if people are looking at using overcommit, then I guess you could include, I'm not sure, maybe what you could do is you include the config file and then you also add it to the git ignore, which would mean that changes to it wouldn't then get called out by Git. That's my initial theory on how you could approach it, but it would require additional exploration.
Thank you. This has all been, I am keeping track.
Oh, very good. We have a performance review tomorrow, so that went quite well for me.
Questions?
That's what you think.
Thanks, Nick. Great talk. I was just going to say, if you need, like, let's say you're running a bank or something, and someone pushing to master, I mean, it wouldn't be catastrophic, but let's suppose it was. GitHub has, like, protected branches which you can enforce, like CI steps, and people can't arbitrarily push to master. It's better server-side control if anyone is looking to launch a bank.
Very true.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.